I'm the best at what I do, and what I do isn't very nice. So, having suffered my way through X-Men Dark Phoenix, or I'm sorry, just Dark Phoenix, they were too ashamed to put the name X-Men on the title. I've now seen all of Fox's X-Men movies, which means I'm okay to rank them. And no, do not get on my butt saying, oh, well, shouldn't you wait for New Mutants? That thing was supposed to come out like over a year ago at this point. I will be shocked if it ever sees a release, and I'm not waiting for it, hoping that it will come out before I do this list. I'm gonna clear this off the board and be done with it. Quick note, if people are uncomfortable either revisiting these movies or even talking about these movies because of some things we've learned about some of the directors involved, specifically Bryan Singer and Brett Ratner, I am not gonna fault you for that. But I'm not factoring that into this ranking. I'm simply taking the movies as they exist and not factoring that into this thing. That means I have 12 of these things to rank. Let's get to it, starting at the bottom. X-Men Apocalypse. This thing I have described as aggressively mediocre, and that might seem a little bit odd to put it at the bottom spot, because like mediocre just means like not very good, doesn't mean awful. That's the thing though. It's not that the bad elements of Apocalypse are the worst thing to ever occur in the X-Men film series. It's that there's absolutely nothing that's good about it. The lows aren't the lowest, but there's literally no highs in this movie. The few things that are any good at all, i.e. Magneto snapping and the Quicksilver scene, are both derivative retreads of stuff the series had already done better. So there's nothing that this thing has to offer. Lousy villain, phoned in performances from about half the cast, and the effects look bad, the story is just dull and boring, and no. Just no. Moving up to number 11, Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix is not really a better movie than Apocalypse was. The difference is, and I mentioned this in my review, it was bad in ways that I found more interesting. So, as opposed to simply being aggressively mediocre, it was at least kind of creatively bad. Like, wow, you found some really interesting ways to screw this up. And yes, that is a massively backhanded compliment, if it counts as any kind of compliment at all. But it does mean, end of the day, I would watch Dark Phoenix again before I would watch Apocalypse again. And so for whatever that's worth, it gets the number 11 spot. Next up, number 10, X-Men Origins Wolverine. People love to crap all over this one, and it is a bit of a mess. It's got characters who have no business being in it. It's got a funky structure to it. It is cartoonish in its effects often as it works its way through. But you know what it has? It's got two things. Jackman's still doing his job. He's not phoning it in. He's trying. And Liev Schreiber, as Sabretooth, is so good. Like, to the point that I am legitimately ticked off he never came back. I get that they wanted to distance themselves as far as possible from X-Men Origins Wolverine, because it's not very good. But, God, he was so good in that part. Him and Jackman are really the only good things going on in it. The rest is just blah. Just kind of nonsense and dull and silly, and who sews Deadpool's mouth shut? Oy. Yeah, we'll move on. Next up, number 9. This one hurt. X-Men. The original from 2000. This is one of those movies that it was pretty good at the time. But it does not hold up, and a lot of the decisions made that were decisions of the time reflect badly. Things like the yellow spandex line really highlight that this movie is running away as hard as it can from appearing to be a comic book movie. It is embarrassed by its source material, and that comes across pretty readily across the film. That said, it's got some stuff going for it, primarily in the casting area. Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier, brilliant. Ian McKellen as Magneto, inspired. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, terrific find. And pretty much all the other actors are doing a good job too. The way that Mystique was visualized, iconic, very cool. It's an important first step in a lot of ways as far as not only this franchise but superhero movies in general go. But looking back on it now, it's dull, it's pedestrian, it's, as I said, kind of embarrassed by what it is. And pretty much all the things that are good about it, and there are some things that are good about it, are even better later on. So this ends up down here. Number 8, X-Men The Last Stand. Now I know some people, their immediate question is, why in the heck is this ranked higher than the original X-Men film? Well, first of all, I'm a slight apologist for this movie. I will just flat out own that. And, you know, it just... The movie had a bum rap going in. The situation was not good. That the conditions under which it was made were not ideal. But even setting that aside, it's got one thing that for me puts it over the original X-Men. Scope. Scale. It brings in that operatic feel that X-Men stories tend to have in the comics. And I like that being there. And then the other stuff that's good in it is pretty much all the stuff that was good in the first X-Men. You know, there's some wonky effect stuff going on, but Ian McKellen's still good. Patrick Stewart's still good. Hugh Jackman's still good. We get a couple of new characters who are also quite good. Kelsey Grammer's great as Beast. And heck, you know what? I'll say it. I like Vinnie Jones as the Juggernaut. It's still not great, but I get a little bit more enjoyment out of it once I'm past the fact that Cyclops was completely casually discarded as if he was a snotty handkerchief as opposed to a founding member of the team and a core character in the franchise overall. Like, once I muscle past that, I do find enjoyment out of it. Number 7, Deadpool 2. I really didn't care for Deadpool 2. I'll just say it. Now, part of that is expectation. I really wanted this film to go bigger and bolder conceptually. I wanted it to do something less traditional. Now that the superhero narrative and origin and proof of concept of the first film was done and dusted, I wanted this to go nuts. And it really only does that with the X-Force sequence. That is what I wanted kind of the whole movie to be, but it doesn't have the guts to do. It retreads too many jokes from the previous one. And I really hate the fact that they fridged Vanessa. That having been said, it's still pretty well put together. It's pretty competent. Domino is awesome. And Cable's pretty well realized, all things considered. So, it's not bad. I have a personal distaste for it. And as far as sequels go, I consider it to be a letdown, but it gets above the ones that I mentioned before, but no higher than this. Number 6. And we start getting into the films that I think are just, they're good. And I don't really have too much to slag off about them. Although I do know some people who are going to want my head on a pike for where I'm about to put this one. Number 6. X-Men First Class. I know some people who genuinely consider this to be the best X-Men movie made. And as far as I'm concerned, those people are nuts. Not that it's bad. It's quite good. I enjoy it. And I think the cast is solid all the way through. I think the vibe that they got with the 60s is kind of a cool thing. I really like how the way that James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender were able to recapture and be true to that dynamic of Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. That is no small feat to be able to pull off. The Wolverine cameo is genius. And it's pretty well put together, but there are some characters who seem superfluous and don't need to be there. Darwin being used as fodder felt very off-putting when I saw that. And then Emma Frost, really, she seems checked out. There are little things like that that just don't quite do it for me. I'm also, while I appreciate they pulled the 60s vibe quite well, I'm not a particular sucker for that, broadly speaking, and I suspect my friends who rank this higher than I do are. That might be part of what's going on for them. It's good, don't get me wrong, but this is where it lands for me. Moving up from here, number 5, X-Men Days of Future Past. I liked this a lot as an end point, as a closing of the book on that era of X-Men. And actually, at this point, I'm going to consider that the end of the franchise, because what came after was Apocalypse and then Dark Phoenix. So I will just pretend forevermore that X-Men, that it's The Last Stand. No, that X-Men Days of Future Past was the end of it. I liked the pulling together of the two different timelines. I feel like it tied a nice bow around the original timeline. The original characters gave them a nice, happy ending, and it worked quite well for that. I liked the interconnectedness of the story. I liked the way it played back and forth. Does it have a few logistical plot holes? Yeah, most time travel stories do, but I really did enjoy this, and I liked the way that it captured both the sense of progression forward of the story, but also capturing a sense of nostalgia, and it balanced all that stuff really well, I thought. Number 4, Deadpool. So, yeah, it was good. It was a breath of fresh air, and it was nice, just to hear Wade Wilson actually get to talk, do his thing, be a jerk. And it's a good time. And the action's a lot of fun. And some of the stuff that goes on with Colossus is nice. I love Negasonic Teenage Warhead. That's like the best. But also like he's hunting down this guy named Francis and making fun of the fact that he's named Francis. It's little things like that. It's letting Wade take you on a trip. A little crazy trip of an adventure, and it's just fun. Number 3, most people wouldn't put this one this high, the Wolverine. If it weren't for the third act, this would have a shot at my favorite X-Men movie, period. I love the first 2/3 of this thing. I love setting up Wolverine as a Ronin. I love how they kneecapped his healing factor, so things felt much more visceral and much more dangerous. I love the fight choreography. I love the cinematography. I love the setting, the vibe, the tone, the performances. Jackman, he never phoned in this performance at any part, and he's definitely doing his best with it here. If it wasn't for the climax, basically the film kind of falls apart from the point at which he gets taken down by all the arrows on chains. After that, the movie goes downhill because the climax is with a villain that is supposed to be a surprise, but I called way early into the film, and the final fight is just kind of dumb. But the first 2/3 is so strong that it makes it this high regardless. I really love the first 2/3 of this movie. Wish I could have stuck the landing. Oh well, that's okay, because you know why? We still got number 2, Logan. I have hit a point in my life where my tolerance level for nihilistic, everything sucks storytelling, my tolerance has gone down. I don't have the taste for it and the stomach for it that I used to have. But you know what? When it's good, it's good. And this is good. This just, again, the X-Men franchise in the films is at its best when it knows what to emulate. That's a big part of what I like about the Wolverine, because it's emulating that sort of samurai sense and Ronin stories. And this is emulating the aging cowboy, the West, the gunslinger who's past his prime. It's evoking all of that and doing it perfectly. The sense of him slowing down, not having anything left, not really having anything to live for, but he's just too stubborn to just lay down and stop, even though maybe he would rather do that. And God, the stuff going on with Charles is heartbreaking. Laura is great. What a great presence that actress is. It's harsh, it's hard, yet it's satisfying. In a very strange and dark way. It just feels like, okay, you get to stop now, Logan. Thanks. And as much as it has been around for a long time, it remains my number one for this franchise. X2, X-Men United. This is where it all came together for me. The characters and the actors who were cast in these roles, who were all well cast in the first X-Men film, getting to do just a little bit more. Mystique having iconic lines like when being asked, why doesn't she pretend to look human all the time? She says, because we shouldn't have to. And the cockiness of Magneto, and just knowing that he's teaming up with the X-Men for now, but he's going to stab them in the back the instant he gets the chance. Nightcrawler, so cool. I love Kurt Wagner as a character. He's fantastic. And the tension around what's going on with Charles, that he gets kidnapped and what is going to be done with him. The angst that Hugh Jackman gets to portray playing Wolverine as he's getting tastes of his past, but still doesn't quite know what it is that's going on. We get to see him go berserk for basically the first time. That just kicks a lot of butt. This feels like the perfect balance of escalation while not losing control of the characters and the emotion. Because as much as I did point out that X-Men The Last Stand felt nice and big and operatic, which I appreciated, it kind of lost control of some of the elements when it went that big. This feels just right. It takes the elements it's got. It's got everything from the nailing down of mutation as a parallel to being queer. That was a wonderful move laid out completely explicitly here, and I love that. The temptation of Pyro is done extremely well. All these elements, all these bits, these pieces, they fit together in a way that for me, no other film in the franchise quite fit the pieces together in just right like this one did. So for me, it's number one. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to have very different rankings from me. But what are your thoughts on this? How do you rank the X-Men films now that this franchise is done? And we'll eventually find out what it is Disney plans to do with it. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff to do, because you can support me on Patreon. Help me keep the lights on and, eat. Plus there's, the like and the subscribe and the bell and all sorts of stuff. Click on things. They do stuff when you do that. Or, don't. You don't have to, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council's adjourned.